Welcome back to the Two Pad Stack, episode 61 here. I know it's a different voice than you hear normally hosting. I know Ace is normally our host here, and I'm just the co-host. I wasn't here last week. Ace isn't here this week. He's battling a bit of a lower respiratory infection. Can't get too many sentences out without a big cough coming his way. So he figured he should take a little stint on IR, rest up, get that voice back to where he needs to be. So we hope Ace feels better. But we got a great episode coming up. I'm Jake Reiser, and with me is Nick Lanciani from Goalie Hogs. Nick, how's it going? Welcome back.
Pretty good. It's the most wonderful time of the year, as they say.
It is. It's feeling like the most wonderful time of year for the Bruins, too, I think the last time we had you on was in the Montgomery era, and things were really frustrating. We were having a really tough time. We were debating who was going to end up replacing him. A lot has happened since then.
A lot.
Even from last week when I wasn't on, there was so many good things going on with this Bruins team. It almost makes me feel like I shouldn't be here. Like, just for the good luck of the team, I almost feel like I should just take a respite until they hit another losing streak, and then I should rejoin. But with the way last week went, I'm just throwing my hands up and being like, you know what? Maybe I should see this as somebody else and let the good juju run for a little bit.
It's kind of like when you're the starting goaltender and then someone comes in, plays his backup, and you're like, maybe they should be the starting goaltender.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe a little bit of Jeremy Swayman and Jonas Corposalo early on. We'll talk about goaltending because there were some great takeaways over the last week. But let's get into the games that happened last week since Ace's last episode 60. We had 3 games, and all were honestly really exciting in their own ways. We go back to last Tuesday, the nationally broadcast game. Both last Tuesday and Wednesday, we had a back-to-back. Both were actually nationally broadcast. Tuesday was Hulu ESPN Plus exclusive. Wednesday was TNT Max. But we'll start on Tuesday with a 3-2 overtime win over the Detroit Red Wings. Quite the game, quite the back and forth. Some of my big takeaways from that: the video coaches, Matt Myers, they come up clutch every single time they challenge. We go down early again. We go down on the power play thanks to Marco Casper in the second period. But then we get a challenge, and ESPN's broadcast does a terrible job of showing it because they focus on it was Jonathan Barron or whatever his name is was offside on the other wing, and they don't look, and they finally get the view from the full blue line, and you're like, oh, it was Eric Gustafsson, and it's like the millimeters of his right skate that's over the blue line that shows he's offside. It's such a great catch by the video coaches to take a look at that. And just, I've rarely ever had to say the video coaches don't do a good job. Every time I feel like they do a challenge, I'm comfortable that they're going to win it because they do such a good job at analyzing and getting things done quickly.
I always appreciate them because having worked in a production truck before and seen multiple monitors at once, at times, and even as a little director in a sense with the Durham Bulls last season, at times it can be very disorienting just staring at a wall of screens and different angles. And other times you just focus and, someone can walk into the room and be like, hey, did you catch that? And you're like, I didn't even know that you walked in. But I know it's on this camera on this angle. So I'm glad you were the one to point out the ESPN choices that they made, because I was yelling at my TV like, show me this angle. Give me this angle right now.
They spent the first 90 seconds of that challenge focused on that top-down angle from the corner camera from the Jumbotron from Hub Vision. And I'm like, that's not the angle you're supposed to look at. You're supposed to look at it dead on from the blue line. You'll have the camera there. I don't know whether they just didn't have access to it or whether they were waiting to parse it out. It's just ESPN's broadcast choices
More
are
the latter.
so frustrating.
It especially I've noticed their ESPN Plus side of things is where they tend to lag on the being sharp and on top of everything. And as great as streaming is, as much progress as we've made in the modern age of how the broadcast game is packaged and brought to the consumer, this is an area for improvement where if you're going to pretend it's a serious thing, you got to take it seriously. And you can make it truly almost, just compare and contrast. You look at the NFL on Prime. on Thursday nights and the way that they do their broadcast. And then you compare it to when you have something like this, or in the near future, NASCAR on Prime, NASCAR on Peacock, all that sort of stuff, because that's the general direction these things are going.
It almost makes me feel good that their mix was so bad, though, on Tuesday night, because listening to Bucci call games, look, he's a great personality on social
Yes,
media.
there's that part.
But to listen
Personality,
to him call a
great.
game is not my cup of tea. Not that I like Judd Surratt either. I'm not a fan of Judd in his broadcasting position. Give me Ryan Johnston all day on 98.5. I'm thrilled he got the position. I think he's got great broadcasting chops. But, the final goal, we'll talk about what happened in overtime in a second. But the mix just completely washed out his goal call, and I'm almost thankful for it. I'd rather feel the energy of being in the building, and it was the only time in the game it felt like that happened. Their mix is just off the whole game otherwise. The broadcast quality isn't great. The cameras are completely washed out. It's not fun watching a game on ESPN+.
I always just think of John Bucci-Gross as the alternative version of Pierre Maguire. Because back
Yeah.
in the day, you'd watch Pierre on NBC and you'd be like, why is he between the glass? He is much better as an analyst, as someone to go to between periods. You can get his stories, you can get his anecdotes, but he doesn't have to try to be cool. He can just be himself. And I feel like Bucci kind of tries to be cool without being truly himself when he's in the booth. And
It's
that
very
is a
exaggerated.
huge difference maker.
Yeah. It's too much. You know, well, I could go down a whole rabbit hole of broadcasting and, feel
Way
like
back in the day, Fred Cusick.
Um, I'm gonna try and avoid that rabbit hole for the sake of the Bruins themselves, because there are some other great points we should talk about in this game. Nikita Zadorov getting his first non-empty net goal with a clapper to tie the game at
Reminding
1.
everyone
Yeah,
he's got a rocket.
I think he's finally rounding out and, is he still marching to the box? Yeah,
I
but
was
I'm
gonna say
seeing
he might still be
many
on
more
pace for 220
positives.
minutes.
Yeah. I'm seeing the positives out of it, though. I don't know whether it's a simplification of the system. I don't know whether, he was finally told just let it loose, but he's looking at least a little better.
He is truly a better signing among the third pairings that we've seen in the Don Sweeney era. And it's not necessarily to say that Zadorov is going to be stuck on the third pairing all season long, but when you think of, okay, we want someone that has a little bit of an edge to his game, that can contribute offensively, but is also more so your traditional shutdown defender, that's Zadorov. And he's still undisciplined at times, but
Mhm.
that just goes back to the edge that he has, where Derek Forbort got a lot of hate here, almost unnecessarily, because he just didn't have the star qualities of Zadorov or others that we've seen. But he was truly, stay at home, penalty kill. That's what you need. That's what you expect. And if you go above that, that's great.
I think it's a product of the cap hit. You look at Zadorov and you see 5 million AAV in cap hit, you're expecting a lot more. I don't think he's ever gonna live up to that cap hit, and I think it's gonna really be a
Probably not.
boon on the cap for the term of his contract. But, you're right. I think, uh, you know, Forbert, when he was a Bruin, at his healthiest, was one of the best PKers on the team. By far one of the best penalty killers on the team. But then again, how often was he healthy in the last 2 years of his contract? Not very. So, you're hoping with the amount of money you're paying Zadorov for longevity and for him to fix some of the things, you have to accept that he's gonna go to the box. Maybe he can fix a portion of that, but you have to expect a lot more out of that. Um, Speaking of people who've had to fix things and are seemingly fixing things and, turning the ship in different ways, let's talk about effort late and the overtime victory. How about David Pastrnak? There's a little bit of controversy in this one, and we'll talk about Pastrnak as we go throughout the week. He seems to be a constant topic. Was that a penalty that he took against Alex DeBrincat in overtime to set up the game-winning goal?
No,
What do you think it was?
it's very direct. That was a classic case of falling a little bit easier than normal. Not just saying full on embellishment, but a byproduct of center of gravity and everything. And, you know, DeBrincat had a hand on the stick, got everything to position. I mean, it's like trying to purposely set up the other guy so that the penalty happens, and then when it doesn't happen, realizing everyone saw exactly what you were doing. It's not illegal by any means. It's gamesmanship. It's how you can gain a competitive advantage ethically in the gray areas. But the fact that there was a non-call is ultimately the right way to be, especially when it comes down to overtime. I hate that, we want this consistency for an entire season, for an entire game, yet game flow is still such a real thing in the collectivistic actions of hockey that sometimes something like this slips by and you just got to say, no, that's part of the game. That it's just how it has been in the 100 plus years of how this sport works compared to something that starts and stops a little bit more like football or like baseball, where you see it every weekend, pass interference, and that's you know it when you see it.
Yeah, exactly. I just started rewatching Ted Lasso with my girlfriend, and in the first episode, Trent Krim asked him to explain the offside rule, and all Ted Lasso has to come back with is, "I have no idea what it is, but you know it when you see it." Um, I'm gonna agree with you that it wasn't a penalty on Pasternak, but I'm gonna disagree with you that it was an embellishment on DeBrincat. But I'm not gonna not in necessarily the penalty way. He doesn't necessarily embellish that he falls. You're right. He has the grip on Pasternak's stick, and that's what makes him fall. He stays down for longer than he should to try and draw the call, and it's exactly why the Bruins were able to score. He doesn't get up fast enough to get on the back check to put pressure on Zacha, and that's why Zacha is wide open. I give immense credit to David Pasternak on the back end of that play. You know, Zacha sets him up for that 1T. Everybody shifts. Pasta wants to take that 1T so badly. Everyone in the stadium, everyone watching this, okay, this is primed for a Pasta one-timer. In every single year before this, you would think that Pasta's clapping that. Instead, he makes that one-touch pass right back to Zacha, knowing everybody slid his way, and you set up an empty 4x6. It's that sacrifice that, I know Pasta's going through a scoring slump. It's a goal scoring slump. It's not a point scoring slump. He's just turned himself almost into David Krejci at this point, that his setups in the last few games have been unbelievable. Honestly, that one almost be trumped by his one against Philadelphia, but to start off last week with that type of an assist for the overtime win was phenomenal.
I'm glad that you touched on this scoring slump, air quotes around that, because I love Billy, Barry, and everyone at Nesson dearly. But the constant talk on the pregame show and the postgame of, oh, well, he's got to be the guy that scores the goals. He's not scoring goals. What is an assist? What is this? What is a point in the score sheet ultimately? It's a goal on the board. And if you had something to do with that, you're still creating offense. You're still creating the goals. I don't need him to be a 50, 60 goal scorer every season. You want him to have at least 30 ultimately. But if he gets to 40 and he has 40 assists, that's still pretty damn good.
What the Bruins have missed for years is balance in the top six. If you rely on one guy or two guys to put in the goals, and guys don't realize, hey, I also need to set up my teammates, that's how you lose games, because you remain top heavy. I just think it's impressive that Pasternak has had the wherewithal. Maybe the puck's not going in the net, but I can still do good on the ice. He leads the team in assists. He's got 18 apples right now and 27 points to lead the team in points. I'll take that. If it means that he's going to set up guys for goals, if he's going to help wake up Pavel Zacha, who now has 7 goals on the season, if he, when he plays on a line with Brad Marchand, Marchand now has 11 goals and 10 assists on the season. Pastrnak has 9, 18, 27. I think people think of points as just a combination of goals and assists, which, adds basic form. That is what it is. But the one thing people don't intrinsically remember it also is it's goal contributions. I bring in that term again from soccer, that goals and assists all are a combination of goal contributions. You have to outscore the other opponents to win. That's how you win. You score more. How can you do that if you don't have someone who's at least thinking, okay, I might not be putting it in the back of the net myself. Let's figure out another way to put up points to get the goals we need to win hockey games.
All the more reason why I love the fact that secondary assists are a thing in the NHL.
Mm-hmm.
Because every other year, someone's saying we gotta get rid of them, and I say no, because this is how you explain to other people that are just getting into the game or longtime fans have not really fully understood the game. It's ultimately about more goals in the other team and how you do that, and the versatility that David Pastrnak has as a sniper, but also as a playmaker. And part of the problem that we've seen with him is that he hasn't brought a consistent effort at times. I have my theories. Maybe he's still injured. Maybe he's still feeling something from the offseason. But at the very least, when he brings it, he's able to see 2, 3, sometimes 4 plays ahead. And you can notice this by observing him when he's at his best. And being at his best means scoring the goal, setting up the goal, or setting up the play that sets up the ultimate goal itself.
Well,
And
he
that's
may
where
in
you get
fact
your
be a
secondary
little bit
assist.
injured. Coach Sacco spoke this afternoon saying he's got a little upper body thing. He may or may not. He's hopeful to be ready for tomorrow, but he may or may not play tomorrow. We'll get to next week's schedule at the end of the episode, but you're right. I think that's also a reflection on the whole team that their mentality was lacking for one reason or another for most of the season. We'll get into some weekly takeaways after we finish talking about the rest of the week, but when Pastrnak is at his best, he's contributing in every which way. And so, he might not be putting it in the net now, but he's certainly contributing as best as he can. And so I'm really happy for that. Speaking of contributing and getting contributions from multiple people, let's talk about that back-to-back. So they finished that overtime win at home in Detroit. They immediately hop on a flight. They end up in the Windy City, Chicago for their second nationally televised game back-to-back. This time on a much better production value on TNT. And they grab a 4-2 victory. Flat start. Somewhat understandable because it's a back-to-back, but also still frustrating. That's something that, continues to worry me. But then they come back. Marchand decides to put the game on his back, scoring 2 beautiful goals. We get the best Raz of the season with Biz suspending him from Mr. TNT in the pre-game show and saying, if he scores 2 points and gets a power play goal, he'll unsuspend him. It's like Marshy heard that and just said, all right, I got this. Came up with 2 beautiful goals set up by Pastrnak, and they got his suspension revoked by the rest of the panel. But, a great rest of that game for the Bruins. Morgan Geekie also had 2 goals, the guy who I felt has been snake bitten for so much of the season. But I feel like once they got off from that flat start, it was all Bruins just about all the time.
Yeah, and there was that guy on Twitter, or X now, formerly Twitter, that called out Morgan Geekie, and he was just kind of like, "What?" And then he scored 2 goals. So I guess bullying works is the lesson that we should have as our takeaway here.
Friend of the
But
podcast, Morgan Geekie, as Ace would say.
the the whole concept of Joe Sacco era Bruins hockey, I mean, it's kind of gone back to like, okay, here's what Bruce Cassidy was doing in terms of the system. Emphasis on offense, less defense. Yeah, you still have arguably a good defense on paper. You set that up for a reason, but you want to have the offense to go with it. Point being, it's less, let's come out in the first period and then get off the gas. It's more, get out there, get in the rhythm. Second period, start putting the throttle down. Third period, let's finish this off. And it's noticeable, especially in the last 8 games that they played. because they've averaged what, like 9 or 10 shots on goal in the first period, which they've been hitting consistently now, as opposed to the Montgomery era, where it was kind of wild. The distance between a 5 shot on goal first period to a 15 shot on goal first period.
Well, it's also
And
the
then
third
the
periods for me
inconsistency
that they had
thereafter.
11 shots on goal in the third in Chicago, whereas you would see, like, at their worst, 2 or 3, at best, 5 or 6. And,
Yes.
it's the fact that they have consistent energy throughout the game. There's one thing I do wanna counter you on a little bit, though, as far as coaching philosophy Sacco-wise and the comparison to Cassidy. It's not necessarily offense-minded versus defense-minded, it's quantity shots versus quality shots, whereas I think Montgomery always preached quality shots. The
Precisely.
the Cassidy and I guess Sacco way is get anything on net. You never know when you're gonna score a dirty goal. You never know if something's gonna leak through. You never know what's gonna go in. So just get it on net. Nothing is bad. You're seeing a lot more exposed shots from the point just because you never know if that rebound's gonna kick out to a place where someone's gonna score. That was like a big no-no under Monty that is back to being fine.
Yeah, and for the puck luck fans, if you're hockey superstitious, that's puck luck, right? If you're only taking the shots that you think ultimately matter and they're not going in, but you don't want to open things up and start throwing everything at the net, that's puck luck. If you throw things at the net, anything can happen.
It's a rubber puck on ice. Rubber inherently will bounce by the time it gets unfrozen enough. So you're hoping that by throwing as much as you can, it'll bounce you the right way. And so I don't know if it's the literal nature of physics to try and change your PDO, but I guess that literally is what's going on here.
I was going to say that it also just ties back to the analytics of like, hey, if you take more shots, you have more chances of getting in. Who would have
You,
thought?
as Wayne Gretzky says, and Michael Scott would say too, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take.
And technically, it was his dad that was the whole beginner of that phrase, the purveyor,
Thank you,
or
Gretzky dad.
whatever adjective, right?
But, another guy I wanna give credit to, talking about assists, is Justin Brazeau. That pass to sneak Geeky in for his second goal on that breakaway, unbelievable vision, unbelievable weight, and it shows me that there is another element to his game. He's not just the big brashing guy who's gonna score dirty goals. He has that hockey IQ that justifies him being in that third line role on the squad.
Every time I think to myself, is Justin Brazeau just Nick Ritchie 2.0? He does something like this, it makes me go, maybe not, and that's nice. It's refreshing. I would like to see him develop a little bit more consistently, uh, but given his age and everything, it's not necessarily going to happen. But it's also not a bad thing if he can be the solid top 9 forward that he is.
That they need top 9 forwards at this point. I'm looking in Providence again, and I'm looking at a guy who has scored 10 points in his 11 games there, or 11 and 10, I forget. I might be conflating the two. Someone who was with the team at the beginning of the season, and someone who might be primed to come back up again, and that's Matt Patra, guys. Matty Patra is lighting up Providence right now, and I don't feel like he's going to be down there for too much longer. And so you take a look at the roster and who is a candidate to go down or who's a candidate to slide down the lineup. And you're right. Every time I look at Brazeau, he gives me a reason to keep him in the lineup, which is kind of nice.
So to that end, who's not giving you a reason to keep them in the lineup right now?
I'll get to that in my dud. I think my dud is
It,
the person who will inevitably be sent back down.
I was going to say that
Um,
might end up being the dud, but I didn't know if there was going to be a difference.
no, I don't. There's not a difference there. You'll hear that in a little bit, everybody. But something we heard very quickly after the end of our 4-2 win in Chicago. The Bruins are back to their old ways of getting coaches fired. The next morning, we found out that Luke Richardson had been fired by the Chicago Blackhawks as their head coach. And I guess that's a rite of passage. Maybe, the Bruins are back on track when they're getting head coaches fired on their own.
Avenging the 2013 Stanley Cup final, just like 11 years late.
Yeah, exactly. But you had that back to back. You felt really good. You went into Saturday, a matinee game against Philly at home. should be a good win, right?
I
They,
mean, easy on paper.
yeah, on paper, but they always find a way to shoot themselves in the foot. And it's one of my takeaways for the week that they just give up the first goal of the game every single game, it feels like. Granted, Matvey Michkov looks like the real deal. He's coming to the league and he's just putting up points left and right. His second goal that he sneaks on that far wing behind everybody to put that puck in the back of the net on the one timer. He's a sneaky good player that I feel like because he's on a Philly team that's not doing well, as much as they're in a good media market, he's not getting as much coverage as he should because he's very talented.
I have a bone to pick with him, and it's mostly because I drafted him and Dylan Gunther on one of my fantasy teams back in, let's see, when was the draft? October. It was like the first, as opposed to, when the season started. But the very first couple of weeks, I was like, this guy, he's going to score. He's going to go off. He's going to be like Artemi Panarin. Came in a little bit later, but he's good. He wasn't doing much. And now he's kicking it in gear after I've already dropped him and he's been claimed by another team. But Gunther, on
Oh,
the other hand, he's been working out for me. So
yeah.
go Utah. I hope you beat the Flyers every time you play them.
Yeah. There was also quite the battle between Michkov and Chuck, Charlie McAvoy. I don't know whether it was instigated. There was a hit that people saw in the middle of the game on the boards. Chuck finishes a hit on Michkov, maybe kind of gets him a little bit with the stick or the skate or something like that. They were barking at each other a little bit. And then there was just a constant battle between them most of the game. And I'm just not really sure what that was about.
I think that was a welcome to the league type of moment. And if you can get under the opponent's skin, then you're inside their mind the whole rest of the day. And, I'm neither here nor there when it comes to advocating for or against that. There's some people that is part of their game, and usually you see it in the Brad Marchand chirping people sort of sense. Other times it becomes a little bit more physical in this element.
Well, speaking of Brad Marchand, we saw some vintage Brad Marchand in the third period. How about
Elite.
seeing a vintage Bruins third period comeback? That felt like it was a couple of years in the making. Transport you back to 2021 there. Down two, you get a nice goal within the first 5 minutes from Trent Frederick. And then Brad Marchand gets sprung again by Justin Brazo. Look at that. Justin Brazo springs another breakaway. He sends that pass into space knowing Marchand can skate into it because Marchand saw that play develop. I listened to the broadcast and I heard one of the broadcasters think he was coming off the bench. Marchand has the hockey IQ. He was already on the ice. He was just cherry picking in the neutral zone. He knew that Brazo was going to get to that puck. And so he's already circling back and he can skate right into that puck. And he does that vintage backhand, forehand, get it through the 5-hole of the goaltender. I haven't seen Brad Marchand finish a breakaway like that in what feels like a couple of years. So that was really cool to see from him.
And that definitely, to me, just feels more hip related. And he's further removed from that point of injury and recovery where he's like, hey, just to remind you, I'm still Brad Marchand.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if the one that Kolosov wants back, but I'll take Brad
As a
Marchand scoring
goalie,
like that
yes.
any day. I'll take Pavel Zacha scoring in overtime again like that any day of the week, set up beautifully by David Pastrnak. Pasta grabs the puck in the corner, comes behind the net, draws two Flyers with him. I think it's Tyson Forster, who's that loose defenseman who should be covering the back post. He comes across Kolosov's crease. So you have two players on Pastrnak, pardon me, and it just leaves Pavel Zacha. I know Pavel Zacha's stick came out of his hands in the corner, and maybe that's why Forster pulled off him. But again, you leave a guy wide open on the back post with a guy who's been setting up everybody perfectly in the last couple of games. It's a recipe for disaster for the Flyers, and it's a recipe for success for the Bruins, who Pastrnak feeds Zacha perfectly. Again, another yawning 4x6, another Bruins overtime victory.
Pavel Zacha, the modern Michael Ryder.
Just needed to make a glove save.
He just needs to tell Rich Peverly, that he should have passed to him earlier or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
For those of you that watched the Champions part of the 4-part documentary on NESN that they did for the last year, that's a reference to that one.
In any case, a 4-3 overtime win finishes off a 3-game week for the Bruins. We are going to take a quick break before we do our weekly takeaways to thank our sponsors. We'll come back and we'll talk about the week as a whole and some of our thoughts on the Joe Sacco era.
This season, the Two Pad Stack podcast is proudly supported by two fantastic local businesses. First, we're going to give a shout out to Earth Eagle Brewings, where great beer meets great company. With locations in both Portsmouth and Somersworth, New Hampshire, Earth Eagle is something for everybody. Whether you're relaxing in their Portsmouth beer garden or enjoying live music and trivia at the Somersworth pub, you'll be in good hands with their craft beers, epic hot dogs, and much more. And don't forget, if you're into brewing your own beer, their homebrew shop has you covered in Somersworth. And when it comes to tattooing, there's no better place than Vital Ink Tattoo in Barrington, New Hampshire. The artists at Vital Ink are all about turning your ideas into tattoos you'll love forever. The team works hard to make sure every visit is comfortable, and their dedication to making your tattoo experience fun and relaxing is unmatched. Whether you're getting your first piece or adding to your collection, Vital Ink is the place to go. Special thanks to both of these sponsors for supporting the Two Pad Stack podcast this season. Be sure to check them out and show them some love.
Welcome back. Again, thank you to our sponsors for the season. I thank Ace for setting those up. If you want some brews and you want some ink, check them out. They seem phenomenal. I know Ace has a great time with them. I haven't been able to make my way up to New Hampshire, but hopefully someday. So again, thanks to our sponsors for being there for us this season. Weekly takeaways. The Bruins are 7-2 under Joe Sacco. At what point does it become concrete fact that the Bruins have turned it around? Is it now? At what point? What part of the schedule do you have to say that?
I think I'm always going to be thinking that they're just failing upwards. But that's just the natural pessimist in me. So, we'll see, because I always say that December and January hockey is just bad hockey. Doesn't matter if you're first or 32nd in the league. It's just bad. It's the time of the year I want to check out most. By February, how they really, because of the uniqueness with the Four Nations face-off and then the general time off that they get, how they handle that break will be a point where I say, like, okay, this team has the it factor, or this team doesn't have it, which isn't a great answer if you want something now, but it is, we measure this in installments. As Ty Anderson has said, you don't necessarily look at the first 10 games, you look at the first 20, and then the next 20, and then the next 20. So by that point, you get to the, okay, now we're at the stretch part. Are you in position to take things seriously, or should you seriously consider dialing it back just a little bit and getting a top 15 draft pick?
I don't know if I'd agree that it's that far out, because the Bruins always have that pressure on them to be a playoff team. And I've said very continually throughout the beginning of the season is that Thanksgiving tends to be the barometer of whether you're going to be a playoff team or not, whether you're in the bubble, whether you're not. And by virtue of the Atlantic Division being shitty this year, they were on the bubble. And so being 7-2-0 in the Joe Sacco era so far, they're back up to third in the Atlantic Division. They've got a 3-point lead over the Tampa Bay Lightning. Granted, the Lightning also have 4 games in hand because of the hurricane that they suffered early in the season, Hurricane Milton. But I think that we're finding that threshold should come sooner rather than later, at least to me. I think it's this road trip that we're going to come up on in the next week. The Sacco era so far has had some lightweights. The Flyers, who aren't a great hockey team, the Red Wings, who aren't a great hockey team, the Blackhawks, who aren't a great hockey team. Even going back before then, I think the strength of schedule for Joe Sacco has been on the easier side. You go into this road trip. I'm trying to think who else we played in last week. Montreal, who's having a failing season. The Islanders, who are wishy-washy. I know we lost to Pittsburgh, but it's this road trip they're coming up on that is one of my 2 barometers of any season generally. It's your Western Canada swing and it's your California swing. When you throw your time into a complete loop, those are make or break moments for me, and they always have been. So
Builds character.
Exactly. It's Winnipeg, Seattle, Vancouver. I want to say they go to Calgary first and then Edmonton.
Correct.
That's a 5-game road swing that I think is extremely pivotal over the next 2 weeks, whether
The
they are a
good thing
playoff
for
team or
them
not. If they
is
can
that
win,
it's pretty much the exact 2 weeks with a day in between at least for all those games. They're not doing the weird Calgary Edmonton back to back like they usually do.
that frankly might help them with adjusting to the time difference, but even still, it's make or break. If you can win 3 of those games, maybe take one of those games to overtime. I don't even care if you lose that game in overtime. If you can take out of 10 points, if you could get 6, maybe 7 points out of this, I feel much more comfortable at this team being a playoff team than I do, um, you know, them not necessarily being great going forward. Do I think that, if they don't do great, it's the be all end all? No. It's a tough schedule. And we know that the makeup of this team is that they can underachieve at times. You're right. It sometimes does feel like they're failing upwards, but I don't necessarily think that if they lose, it's a be all end all. But I think if they win, it goes to show that, this team is actually starting to solidify itself. And if they don't, it's just another microcosm of the team overall that they'll have streaks where they go good, they have streaks where they go bad. And it is what it is. And that's the roster. And that's what Taco has to deal with. But I think that if they can turn this around and win a great road trip here, that they're set really well for the rest of the season.
To that end, this road trip really supplements the overarching foundation of philosophy in the Neely Sweeney front office, whether or not there is the long-term confidence as a projection of the outcomes that they have in the next 2 weeks.
I can agree with that. You look at the teams that they have, I think I look at that first team with the guys who they have locked up in Winnipeg, and they've, been perennial underachievers. They've been paper tigers, and all of a sudden they look like one of the best teams in hockey. And so the Bruins, who have never really been a paper tiger in that sense, they might not always have had the most prolific playoff success, especially in the last few years, but they're going to go in and they're at least going to fight.
Right.
It feels like the shoe's on the other foot now. It feels like the Bruins roster looks like a paper tiger and the Jets look like a force to be reckoned with. And so if you can go in and show that you're not who meme culture comes into my head. They are who we thought they were. Just show us you're not who we think you are. Show us who you actually want us to be built. I can agree with that. Show us that the roster you built is actually worth the money you put into it.
Otherwise, everyone that's like, oh, they should just tear it down and rebuild. It's easy to do, but the actual rebuilding process is a lot harder. I would argue for more of a Washington Capitals approach to a retool somewhat on the fly. I mean, you saw what they sold last year approaching the deadline, and then the overhaul that they did in the offseason. I think you still can do that with the current Bruins roster, given your expendable pieces would be the guys that are expiring contracts this year. And then your overhaul might be, okay, you have some veterans who you could love them for days on end if they stayed here forever, but it is a business and you want to get better. And so that guy gets shipped out for an actual return that you can, utilize that in your lineup now or get draft picks to get back on track a year or two from now.
But this is also a really hard time of year to get any value return on contract. I look at what
Oh, for
happened
sure.
as we record this on Monday, December 9th, the trade the Colorado Avalanche made today, send Alexander Georgiev and Kovalev to the San Jose Sharks for Mackenzie Blackwood. They're floundering in net right now, but they
Yep.
gave up an immense amount of
Yep.
value to try and right the ship in net. So, it as much as yes, to the rebuilding side of things, saying, hey, maybe if this doesn't go well, they should try and figure out how to rebuild over the next couple of years. It's just not the right time to find that valuation. So while I get the frustration of people like that, you're nowhere near the right time to try and get the value out of the contracts that you should. It's not the right time at all. They sold at a huge loss. I'm extremely confused by what the Avalanche are trying to do here. I know that Blackwood is certainly better than, say, Freddie Anderson might have been to try and pick up, or I know if John Gibson has been the talk of trades for eons now, trying to get out of Anaheim, but I just don't think it was worth it, in my opinion. And I think they're floundering and really scrambling to try and figure out what to do. So no to the rebuild at in the immediate next week or two, depending on what happens, but inherently on the theory if they don't perform well going forward.
And a quick note on John Gibson. I really need the Ducks to trade him because I have Dostal as one of my goaltenders, and he
I
was
do
doing
too.
great. And now they're kind of going for more of a rotation, and it's just throwing everything off. I mean, I still won this week, but
Yeah.
just saying.
Also, a weird point on the Caps. I know you brought them up as far as the rebuild goes. They're tied for the league lead in points.
Yep. And they went from having a goal differential similar to the Bruins this year of just being playoff team, but not able to score, which is a big deal anytime, but especially in the playoffs, to league leader in goal differential any given day. I mean, it might have changed since last night, but I was just looking at it the other day, recording goalie hugs and saying the Capitals, if I did a power ranking as I did, they're number one because they're able to score. They've got everything going in the right way. Minnesota just got into that league leading mentality. They're my number two. Winnipeg, who's lost a few more games than they've won in the last week or two, they slipped to number three. I mean, for that reason alone, those are the three teams that you can try to model yourself after. It's a copycat league. And you don't have the cap hell that the Wild have. You have a more similar component to your roster with Washington in Ovechkin and Backstrom, who I get is never going to play again. But in terms of age and generation of players, you have Marchand, you have Coyle, you have others. That's the sort of moves that you can make someday if push comes to shove. And Winnipeg, I mean, they're a cheat code having Connor Hellebuck.
Yeah. Well, speaking of goaltending, let's get into a little bit about Jeremy Swayman and his last week. One thing, let's frame it this way. One thing we had talked about a lot on this podcast is whether his lack of attritional preseason, his lack of attritional warm-up had hampered him. And when he would actually wake up, if that were the case. When Jim Montgomery got fired, it was a big talking point, that the whole preseason was flat. So it's not an excuse for anybody. All of a sudden, Swayman's looking pretty good. A good win in the Centennial game against Montreal, a good win at Chicago, and then he's back in net again for the Philly game, gets another win. I think he's starting to right the ship and look more like himself again.
Yes. And part of that, not to just pile on Monty some more, but part of that goes back to the whole when your goaltender, whether or not it's directly their fault, has given up 4, 5, 6 goals, you should probably pull them out and put in the other guy. But Montgomery wasn't doing that, whether it was Swayman or Korpisalo in net. And that can really deride the confidence of someone trying to get into the rhythm and routine of the season, if not overarching. Swayman, he is certified as the starter now. The torch has been passed from Bruins goaltending legends all the way from Tiny Thompson through Tim Thomas, Tuukka Rask to today. So in terms of the overall mantra, he is a very competitive goaltender. He loves to put something on the bulletin board and say, I'm going to prove that person wrong. I am hopeful that we are seeing that now and it continues throughout the rest of the season because I love that competitiveness that he has. And I think people can ultimately kind of use that, not just in hockey and as kids learn to play hockey, but in some of the lessons outside of the sport itself, where the belief in oneself and the ability to do your job, have a good work ethic, show up smiling every day, things will pan out.
His nickname in the locker room was Bulldog for a reason. The dude just has compete, he has bite, he has fight in him, and it's just impressive to watch. And it's impressive to watch from a hockey psychology standpoint as well. We know that mental health is such a much bigger issue in sports in general now that they have sports psychologists on teams. If you look at him, he's had to deal with a lot between arbitration last year. Hearing your team who you think loves you tell you you suck in XYZ ways, and this is why we should only pay you, I felt like was the sticking point. Hearing the fan base get extremely frustrated in these contract negotiations over the summer because you believe in one valuation and the team believes another, that's got to get in your head. And so, you wonder how much that also has played into the first few months of the season. We're 9 weeks in now. And maybe now that he's gaining a little bit more confidence, we see that, reflect on the ice. It's not, and, I think most Bruins goaltenders, you're right. They also benefit from having great defenses in front of them and not giving up high danger chances. Korpisalo has saved a lot of high danger chances in the last couple of weeks, but you hope that Jeremy Swayman shows that mentality that he's the bulldog and overcomes whatever mental health stipulations, whatever, things might be sticking in his head, because we have to factor that into everybody's game. You don't get on the ice and go blank. That's not what happens. You bring work home with you regardless. I work a day job. I bring my work home with me.
You were
you can't
literally
just drop
working before we
everything.
started.
Yeah. So I give a lot of credit to Sway for hanging in there. It's also one of the toughest media cities and fan cities in sports to play in. I will give Boston a lot of credit. I love being a Boston sports fan, but we are extremely hard on our athletes. We demand success regardless. And we are very quick to villainize people, even when they don't deserve it. Even when they do deserve it, we do. When they don't, it's tough to turn people back.
It's like the Rangers trading Jacob Trouba and all the Rangers fans coming out throwing a ticker tape parade where I'm like, maybe relax on that a bit. He's still a human being, So I get it. Trouba's not the number one defender anymore, but he's still a quality third pairing guy with the leadership, and he's got a good head on his shoulders.
Mm-hmm.
He tries to take other people's heads off, but that's a different story.
Radko Gudas and Jacob Trouba on a team scares the crap out of me.
Yes. It's the same with Swayman in terms of you can't villainize the person that these guys are. They are athletes, but they are humans first that train to be in their sport. Just like anyone is a human that trains to be a server at a restaurant or a host at a comedy club or whatever it is. You have to be respected to an extent before you are criticized on your performance.
It's tough. It's a tough world we live in where we're all very critical of one another. We're all very critical of ourselves, but we have to give guys the benefit of the doubt sometimes. We have to give people grace. It's been a really tough season for a lot of these guys, and so you hope that just this nice stretch gives us a lot more studs than duds, which I guess leads us into a great way to end the episode. Which it's been feeling really good to have more choices of studs than duds. But let's get into it for the last week. Who are studs and duds? Where I know we batted a couple of names back and forth. Nick, why don't you take it away? Who your stud of the week is and who your dud of the week was?
I do want to give an honorable mention to Jonas Korpisalo on the topic of goaltending real quick, because I know, he's the guy that has had a lot of high danger chances and he's made a lot of saves. He plays a little bit looser to the point that I am slightly fearful, but I know most of the time he's going to make the save in a desperation manner that I go, oh, right, that's just the way he does. It's like watching Tim Thomas play back in the day. Not to the 2010, 2011 extent, but more like around 2008 when you were like, there's something here in this guy, but there's also a lot to be concerned about still. But that's, not quite, didn't get enough playing time to be a stud.
Yeah.
We talked about Brad Marchand and the elite performances he's put on in his entire career, let alone this week. He's got 3 goals in his last 2 games. He's got an assist in Detroit. He's kind of back, which is great to hear and to see. So if this other guy didn't exist, I would give my stud of the week to Marchand alone, because this is what you want to see in it, leadership, and especially when he's at 36 years old, can you still be relevant? But because of the whole overarching factor of what do you do about a guy like Trent Frederick, And earlier this season, I said, Frederick's got to do more. His 2 goals against Philadelphia, great. An assist versus Detroit. You go back just prior to this week, an assist versus Montreal, an assist versus Pittsburgh. He's playing a little bit more consistently and raising that stock price. He's a pending RFA or a pending UFA, whatever. Point being, if this is the type of year where the Bruins make the playoffs, or if this is the type of year where the Bruins don't make the playoffs, you trade him either way. I will give him partial stud credit with Marchand this week, but he's making the case for I am a serious player, and I need to see more from him if I were a GM trying to acquire him, or even Don Sweeney myself trying to evaluate him in terms of, okay, you can play at this level and you can take it to the next level. We need to see that more consistently. If you have more of these weeks, you will be stud of the week more often. And I would love that for you. But if he regresses at all, that's the whole, the main selling point of why his value might be lower when we reconvene in March and say, okay, the deadline came and went. What are we talking about?
You want him to be serious? I made my case to be the best trade bait possible. And frankly, he might just have to be trade bait in general if you want to improve this roster. And that's no offense to him if he continues to play well. But, we've already heard rumors that there were GMs interested in Trent Frederick's play. And it's because of what his performance was this week, especially in the game against Philadelphia on Saturday. 2 gritty goals, dirty goals, a backhander off of a rebound, and then a nice 5-hole finish, but a puck that's kind of bouncing around in a no man's land that nobody's really trying to think about in a big mess of people. And he's the one who gets to it and puts it in the back of the net. So if he can play consistently, he might just be trade bait regardless of whether the Bruins are doing well or not.
Exactly. My dud, on the other hand, you can look at the consistency or inconsistency of a guy like Charlie Coyle throughout the season, and you can look at Frederick and go, they're kind of the same, but like separated by 10 years or whatever. Carlo, on the other hand, Brandon Carlo's my dud this week. Not for the, he's not playing defense well. I mean, he was a minus against Philly. He was a minus against Chicago. He's a plus against Detroit. +2 against Montreal. Plus minus is and isn't the greatest thing, contextually speaking. But it's the fact that he hasn't had a point dating back to October 16th when he had a goal versus Florida. I know Carlo is not the offensive defender that we look at Charlie McAvoy, Mason Lohrei, or Hampus Lindholm and say, that's more like it. But it's the fact that he only has 3 points in 29 games, and he's playing second pairing minutes. He is one of the leaders on the team. He is kind of a go-to guy when it comes down to the Bruins' identity of the modern era. I would love it if he could just get an assist. Score a goal, great, but if you can get an assist or 2 here or there to really bring something out of the overarching game plan, because we know the power play has been, well, and we also know the penalty kill has had its struggles at times too. If Carlo can just get me something, if he could be more noticeable for good reasons rather than noticeable for the wrong reasons or just not really there, I would love it. But for this week alone, he's my dud. Nothing against him. Again, it's the fact that we haven't seen him in a while. And as a defender, not being seen can be a good thing, but not being seen for long stretches of time can be a little concerning.
But then at what point do you point the finger at a guy also like Parker Wotherspoon, who's had to step in since the Hampus Lindholm injury? No points in 15 games total this season. Not even just since he's had to step in. He just doesn't even have any points on the season in 15 games played.
Wotherspoon is a fun guy because he has yet to score his first career NHL goal, and he's only played, 80? I'm trying to find him on the roster right now.
Just go to the stats page and scroll all the way down to the bottom and you'll find him.
Right. We love when Chrome takes its sweet time. But 68 career games, 9 assists. And the overarching majority of those games were played last year. 41 games played, 8 assists. I don't know how he's made it this far. I'm glad that he has. I like him as a depth guy. He's great in the step in for immediate support role. But there's a reason why Jordan Osterley is playing more than he is at this current juncture in time.
I almost wanted to put Osterley as one of the studs I was considering because he has looked really interesting and really rounded out the Bruins defense core in a way that I genuinely wasn't expecting. It's not that he stepped into a Hampus Lindholm role, but he's brought a steadiness that's maybe allowed McAvoy to step up a little more, and it's been a really interesting pairing watching the two of them.
That is quite noticeable, and I think part of it has to do with the fact that a guy like Osterley's had 378 games under his belt. He is a little bit older than people may or may not realize. He's also a lot younger. I mean, it's the beard that can throw things off. He's only 32, but that's obviously the wrong age, wrong side of 30 in sports. But he is very much the calming presence where, if you remember Stephen Kampfer, Kampfer 2.0, but with more height and maybe skill. I mean, it depends on what you're looking for in the individual game. And as the sort of foil of McAvoy in terms of the styles that you want his defensive partner to play, he's worked out really well. Obviously, I hope Hampus comes back soon, though.
Yeah. Oh, the thing is funny, we found some sort of silver lining even in a dud, that this defenseman might be doing well, but this D-man is doing a lot better. In any case, I'm going to flip back to the forward side of things because that's where my studs and duds are a little more focused. I know we talked a lot about David Pastrnak and his passing revolution, kind of looking David Krejci-esque in the last week or so, and that put him on my stud list. But I also want to give credit to Pavel Zacha for the finishing as well. Ace continually says that Zacha has one of the best shots on this team. We saw over the last couple of years, his finish is phenomenal, and it hadn't shown up for most of this season. He could have whiffed on both of these 4x6s and it wouldn't have been off-putting or out of line for what the season has felt like for him so far. So for him to get 2 goals, granted, yawning cages, but for him to actually finish, have 2 shots, I'll argue that that second goal on a much harder angle than the first goal, much more on the goal line, a much tougher pass to try and receive because Pastrnak covered by 2 guys, and so you're waiting for that timing. But 2 goals this week, a guy who's needed to get off the schneid. I feel like he warrants a share with Pastrnak here, that their connection. And frankly, if you want to take your stud and put a Pastrnak, Marchand, Zacha line together of guys who've needed to step up and all look really great, that's my trio of guys who look phenomenal. So I'm happy to make those guys my studs of the week. My dud, on the other hand, is the guy who I think should be sent down in lieu of Matty Patra, and that's Mark McLaughlin. And I don't necessarily mean that as an indictment on Mark McLaughlin. It's an indictment on the prospect system as a whole, and I've said that a few times already this year as well. We just don't have a great prospect system. It's a result of Don Sweeney not drafting well, but it's also a product of success where you play so well, you end up in unenviable draft positions in the late 20s most of the time in the first round, or you're trading your first round draft pick to get a player to try and help in the short term. And was McLaughlin UDFA signing or was he a draft pick? I'm not entirely sure. But regardless, I know regardless he wasn't necessarily on the radar of prospects originally. I know when he signed, he came up and had a really interesting time. He was UDFA. Okay.
Yes. I was going to say he was undrafted. He played at BC. He kind of, even there, it was like, I don't know. Is he going to make it long-term anywhere or not? He didn't have
one of those
spectacular
addictions that
numbers.
Don Sweeney has of signing guys who play in Boston or from the Boston area. That, between him and Justin Brazeau, I'm picking Justin Brazeau. Brazeau has shown me more than Mark McLaughlin has, and I'd rather see Matt Patra up here doing what he needs to do. If you want to slide Brazeau to the 4th line has definitely cooled off a little bit.
For sure.
But I think that Patra warrants more of a spot on the big club roster than McLaughlin does. You just said being invisible sometimes can be a good thing. It's not a good thing here for McLaughlin, who has to fight for his ice time every single game, and it's just not showing up. So McLaughlin, I hope to see you in Providence soon. As much as not an indictment on your character, just you're not cutting it right now on this roster.
Yeah, he needs to bring something, and he hasn't really done that in any of his NHL showings. 11 games in the 21-22 season, 3 goals. I mean, he got them right off the bat, right away. He played 10-29 average ice time per game. 2 games while people are injured in 22-23. Nothing to really show for it. 1 goal in the only game he played last season, but again, that was like game 82. Now you're at a point where this is your biggest chance at solidifying a spot, because it can be said the bottom 6 of the Boston Bruins is arguably their weakest parts of their entire offense, because you want at least 1 or 2 of those guys to translate into being your penalty killers, and that's how they get a little more ice time. McLaughlin hasn't been able to do that. And even looking at his Providence numbers, it's gone down from season to season. You might still look at it right now and you might say, well, he's got 10 points in 15 games when he was with Providence before being called up. That's wonderful. But last season, 14 points in 68 games. The season before that, 30 points in 66 games. That's not a good thing.
And it goes to a point you talked about earlier on the broadcast too, that secondary scoring is a huge thing, and we saw it in the revitalization of Trent Frederick, that you want your secondary scoring to be a huge part of it. We talked about it in regards to Pasternak as well, that you have to have a balanced roster and balanced scoring. You need your bottom 6 to produce in some regards. Those are the teams that win out when your fourth line is just as potent and dangerous to score as your first line is. At least 3/4 of the time, half the time, It's not like you're putting out your fourth line, it's like, okay, they're just gonna back check the hell out of us and try and hit us, and that's all that we expect out of them. And Ace and I talk about this in frustration with the guys that Don Sweeney and Evan Gould choose to call up and send down. I don't think Georgi Merkulov has gotten a fair shot on this team. Patra has earned the right to come back up. Why not call up Vinny Lettieri, who continues to put up points down there? If you want your bottom 6 to produce, why not have guys who are producing actually come up?
There is an argument to be made for, they're getting more ice time on the first line in Providence. But there's also an argument to be made, they're getting the ice time, they're making the results happen. Why not play your fourth line 12 minutes a night instead of 9 minutes in Boston? Because those guys could generate more offense in Boston. And Merkulov, his 4 games last year, I thought, okay, this guy, he's on the radar now. That's good. This year, he has gotten a couple points on the board. He's looked good, and I want to see more of him. I don't want to see him necessarily the entire year or even half a season, but I wouldn't mind if he got 20, 25 games. And if you go with someone else or you get to the deadline and you say, well, we've brought in, Brian Gianna 2.0, but he's actually good this time around. Fine. But give him more time to really adjust to the jump from the AHL to the NHL and to come into this lineup next season and be on the team. Patra, on the other hand, he should be on the team already. I think it was short-sighted to send to Providence other than to say, hey, your confidence is taking a hit. Maybe it's noticeable. Maybe it's not noticeable to you yet, but go score, because scoring a goal in any league feels great. Go score, go feel better, and then you'll be back up here. And he's done that. He's deserved the call-up. And Mark McLaughlin over here hasn't.
It's like we're getting half the concept, that we're not seeing Riley Tufte and Max Jones shoehorned into the lineup. I know Max Jones is down in Providence, but thankfully we're not seeing them shoehorned in just for the sake of them, being money signings. But Mark McLaughlin, Jeremy Veal was a failed call-up, a fourth-line grinder in Providence, who I have no idea what he was called up at the time he was. We're just not fully getting the concept yet of who needs to be on this roster and who isn't. And that's always a constant battle. But for so many people, it's obvious to see that you need point producers in your bottom six, and I just get so frustrated as to why you're not calling up the guys, even if the reason is they're getting first line minutes in Providence. Show up and see what they can do in Boston. It's limited ice time. It's sheltered minutes on the fourth line. Why not give it a shot for 20-25 games and see what's going to happen? Sometimes those 20-25 games are the difference between being third or second in the division and being on the bubble and being on the outside of the playoffs. So I know it's the ever living puzzle of the roster, but they have to realize that sooner rather than later, I would hope. And I would certainly hope that this, 10 or 11 games that Patra's been in Providence is just for confidence and just for showing we see him back up in Boston very soon.
Precisely. And you make a great point. If they don't have to get the points, but, like I thought about John Beecher at one point and said, maybe he could be a dud. Not really. He's been making the right plays. He's been doing the right thing. It's just the points aren't there because he's on the fourth line. And he's not at that point where he's either going to be the third line center that we hope he will be in the near future or what have you. I mean, he's still young and he's got time to develop.
So is Matt Patra. But you know what? Patra's developed well. I'll give Beecher some credit as well. I did call him a dud a couple of weeks ago because of his lack of point production on the fourth line when Cole Koepke and Mark Kastelik had been putting up goals. Maybe they've all fallen back to earth and come back to normal. But again, that fourth line, they continually play the right way. So I'll excuse a little bit of a dip in offense as long as they're playing the way that they are. So
as I say to any fourth line, if the puck is in the offensive zone, good.
Exactly. We'll have to see a lot of them show up for next week's slate. We talked about it earlier. It's a tough week coming up. At Winnipeg on Tuesday, at Seattle on Thursday, at Vancouver on Saturday. The next week, Ace should be back. Hopefully he's feeling better. But we have a tough slate coming up. I hope to go 3-0. I frankly hope to go 2-1, quite frankly. I don't know if we'll win in Winnipeg, but I love to see them rebound against Seattle and Vancouver. That'll be my prediction for the week. But what are your thoughts on the week coming up?
Well, Winnipeg, they have shown signs of being human. I think the Bruins could squeak out of Winnipeg with a gritty win somehow. Win in Winnipeg. It's in the name. I think Seattle is probably more of a trap game based on the fact that the Kraken can score now. We've seen it all season long. They've had no problem piling pucks in the net. They've also had no problem giving up as many goals, but that's a different story. Joey Decord looking like he's probably should be playing like 70 games at this point.
Yeah.
But they beat the Rangers, who a team like the Bruins, where they could make the playoffs, they could miss the playoffs. It's all just a matter of how many teams in the Metropolitan make it in the first place, and then how many teams in the Atlantic Division actually stink by the season's end. Vancouver, I'm not seeing the Canucks really doing that much that makes me buy into the Canucks this year. I'm also not seeing enough to make me say, they're going to pack things up and go home early. But you can probably get a win there. Calgary could be another trap game, but you should get a win there. And Edmonton, if you can get to overtime, I mean, they don't really have goaltending. They also have a bit of a mess on defense, but they have McDavid and Draisaitl.
Sometimes that's all that matters.
Exactly.
Any final thoughts on the week overall?
I just hope Matt Patra gets a call up before they hit the road, and ultimately they've already done that, but I hope he gets a call up sometime before next week.
I'd love to see that he meets the team out in Seattle or something like that. That would be great.
Meet him out in Vancouver with a water bottle and pretend it's 2011 again.
Bring back some Nathan Horton, eh?
Exactly.
Well, it's been a nice week. We hope to have more nice weeks. Nick, it's been great having you on. Thank you for stepping in as always.
Anytime. It's been great being here.
And we thank you guys for listening. You can find us on X, formerly known as Twitter, and TikTok at 2PadStackPod. On YouTube, you can find us at 2PadStack. If you're on YouTube, just look below. You should see everywhere we are. You can see our nice faces. Maybe we're built more for video than for radio, thankfully. On Instagram, we're 2_pad_stack_pod. And then we've got the website, 2padstackpod.com. And now everywhere on our socials, we've got a link tree. So if you're like, hey, I can't find you somewhere, just look on our bio. We've got a link tree. You'll be able to figure out where we're at. But thanks again for tuning in to 2 Pad Stack. Hopefully, we'll be back next week. Peace.